Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending upon when and where you're watching this. We're going to cover ransomware prevention. This is a two-part series, and we are going to cover in this first section, what is ransomware, what are some of the things that you need to know about it, so you understand what the risk is to the organization or your organization. And then tomorrow we're going to cover our checklist that we've developed based upon the federal government guidelines, what you should check for to see how well you're set up for ransomware to prevent it. So the first section here, oh, by the way, you got to start with the housekeeping first. So if you have any questions during the live session, feel free to fill them out in the questions from the audience section. Just go ahead and put your questions throughout the session. We will look at those and answer those as we go. Questions after the live session, you can send them to us. Our blog is at learnsecurity.org, and there's a form you could fill out and send us any of your questions or comments or anything you want to let us know. If you're looking for CPE credits for this, Bright Talk does a nice job of keeping track of how long you were on. So you can keep that for your records. Basically, for most organizations, it's self-reporting of CPE. And you again, tomorrow's the other session on ransomware. The slides are available for download, and there's a link to get to the questionnaire that we'll talk about extensively tomorrow, but briefly talk about today. And please remember to rate our session when we're done. And I'm Don Hester. I'm the IT auditor at Mason Associates. I work in Northern California. And I'm joined today by, with Robert DeRook, who is an instructor at Indiana University, who works in the cybersecurity field with me as well. So we're here to answer. Rob said hi. Anyways, so what prompted this? I would have to say about, what is it, 2 years ago, Rob? We did a session on ransomware telling everybody they need to watch out for it 2 years ago.
Yep.
But now it seems to be much more of an acute problem. In other words, the risk has grown to the point that we're now seeing clients getting hit with ransomware. And in July of this year, the federal government came out with recommendations, and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, which is a part of Homeland Security or under Homeland Security, came out and said, hey, look, year to date, it's cost $5 billion, just year to date, in cleanup costs of ransomware. And they found that especially local governments are particular targets for ransomware. And there is a very targeted approach by the hackers to hit local governments. And we'll talk about maybe some of the reasons with that. In addition to us taking and creating a, we also have interviewed actual victim organizations to see what they had in place or what they didn't have in place, so that the information that we're giving you is the most accurate that we can get. But things are unfolding as we speak. So if you see a screen like this, it's probably too late. And we want to the whole goal of this is try to get your organization prepared so that you can avoid this and at least know what the risk is and know whether or not your systems are resilient enough to fend off an attack. So we'll talk about all of that as well. But I got to start off with what is ransomware. And ransomware is basically, we call it malware in our industry. Basically what that is malicious software. And it's a big bucket for anything, whether it's a virus, a bug, a Trojan horse. We have all kinds of names of different types of malware, but we just call it malware at this point in time because differentiating what type of malware is important for us in the industry, but for everybody else, it's just malicious. Now, ransomware is a certain type of malware that basically, once it gets into your system, will either do one of two things, either encrypt all the files on your system so you can't use them, or to lock your system out so that you cannot have access to your systems. and then it'll ask you to pay a ransom, and then they will give you keys that can unlock your system. And that's generally what they kind of do. I like the idea of, I thought about this when I was looking at it. You know the boot that the police put on your car if you parked in the wrong place? It's kind of like a ransom, right? Your system is, your car is basically locked out, for the lack of a better term. You can't go anywhere until you pay your fine, right? So it's the same type of thing, but we're talking on a technology side of things in your computer systems, locking your systems out so that you have to pay a ransom. Now, you don't have to pay a ransom, but that's the general way that this ransomware works. So the FBI has an official definition of it, and I guess, again, this is more for an academic type of thing. Ransomware, it talks about usually how it gets installed. Usually someone clicks on a link. Like 93% of the ways that the malware gets into organizations is by employees or staff clicking on something, downloading a file, or picking up a thumb drive in the parking lot, something along those lines, and then introducing the malware to your system. So definitely the weakest link is staff, and it's not that they should know better, because if they haven't been trained on what to look for and what to watch out for, and some of these, we'll talk about social media here in a little bit, some of these ways that the attackers use are extremely, very cunning. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we've seen that other of our clients have gone through. I want to start off with telling you that, hey, this is nothing new, right? So the first instance of ransomware was back in December of 1989. Many of us didn't even have computers back then, and they certainly weren't mainstream. And the internet was, you know, just an idea at that point. I mean, it was more than an idea, but it wasn't really what it is today. But one of the ways that they did it was by sending a diskette that had the malware on it, and then when you put it in, it would lock your system out and ask for a ransom. And back then, you'd have to send a money order to some other country that didn't extradite or something like that. But anyways, this is the way that it used to happen. Now, it didn't really take off. So if you look throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, and even up to 3 years ago, ransomware was very rare. It wasn't something that you would see a lot of. But what we see is that the hackers or the attackers or the criminals basically find new ways, and they're always constantly changing. And that's something that we kind of have to remember, that the risk landscape changes on a regular basis, and we have to adapt with it, and we have to kind of keep our ears to the ground to kind of say, okay, what's the new thing that's out there that is happening? And again, Rob and I did a presentation. If you want to see that original presentation, it's on our YouTube channel, and if you go to learnsecurity.org, our blog, and you go to the YouTube channel, you can look up, it's ransomware, I think it was from 2017, I believe. You can go back and check it, and you can see what the statistics were back then, and that is when it really started hitting. 2016, I think we saw a couple variants in the later quarters of the year in 2015. 2016, it hit really hard. 2017, we're telling everybody they need to watch out for it. 2019's here, and now local governments are just a target of it, as well as hospitals and other organizations. So we had a big, long period of time where ransomware wasn't being used, and all of a sudden it was being used again. Now, the way they ask for the ransom this time is they usually ask for it in cryptocurrency, and that most often is Bitcoins. And so I've heard some security professionals recommend that you talk with your attorneys and maybe find an outside attorney that may have a Bitcoin wallet or can set one up, so that if you do decide that you wanted to make a payment for the ransom to get your information back, that it's already set up. Now, some insurance companies also have this set up if you have cyber insurance, and you may want to look at cyber insurance if you don't have any at this point in time, or at least evaluate your coverage currently to make sure that your coverage is going to cover what you need it to if there is a ransomware attack. Often the amounts of ransom that are asked for are very modest, and we'll take a look at some of the amounts that have been asked for. Generally, it's not that expensive. Sometimes the amount of the ransom is less than the deductible for the insurance. So it's interesting. They're trying to keep it low because they want to have a higher probability of you paying the ransom. And if you look at the total cost one way or the other, it's hard to make a case other than the fact that you don't want to encourage crime not to pay it, to be completely honest. If they're only asking for a couple $1,000s or maybe tens of thousands of dollars versus $1 million worth of cost to recover without it, that's not a decision that I'd want to have to make for an organization. So one of the key things to know about this is that organizations that do pay the ransom, only about 25% statistically have not gotten their information back. Most organizations get their information back. Insurance companies actually try to track who they think the players are, and with the cryptocurrencies, one of the reasons why they do it is so they can launder the money and you can't find out where it went. But they do their best to try and find out so that they know if they pay the ransom that you're going to get the information back. Otherwise, they don't want to pay the ransom. So it behooves the cyber criminals to give you your keys so that you can decrypt your stuff if you have paid a ransom, because then nobody will pay a ransom if they know they're not going to get their information back, right? So there's a high probability that if you did, you would get your information back. Also know that the ransom is oftentimes negotiable. In many cases, organizations have said, oh, that's too much, we can't afford it, and they've negotiated down. I believe it's harder if you're an organization to make that. I know that a lot of people that have been personally hit by ransomware, they've negotiated it down to being, that initially they may have asked for $5,000 from an individual to release their personal home computer or whatever, and they talked them down to $500. So depending upon, they seem to be amenable to doing a negotiation. Again, if you have insurance carriers, they would probably be the ones handling all of this, but if they decide that they wanted to pay for it. But we have to remember that paying the ransom encourages crime, right? When you say crime doesn't pay, well, if crime does pay, in other words, people do pay to get their stuff back, that only encourages it. And because we've had a number of organizations who have paid, it just fuels the fire, so to speak. Now, the National Council of Mayors in the United States made a statement that they do not want anybody paying the ransoms, and yet cities that have been hit have been paying the ransom. So even though it's recommended that you don't, the FBI certainly doesn't want you to do it. And National Council of Mayors says don't do it for local governments, and yet we still see them doing it. And again, that's going to be an organization that somebody, if you're a local government, let's say your city manager or council may have to make a decision on something like that. It would probably be a good idea to have that conversation before the day comes. So why do they use Bitcoin? Because they want to launder the money, and there's different ways that they can do it. There's things called Bitcoin mixers that basically take a bunch of transactions and put it into a bunch of random wallets and then move it around as much as possible to make it difficult for anyone to trace who the individuals are who are behind the ransomware. In that way, they can maintain their anonymity. And there are attempts that are made to, because with Bitcoin, the thing is the ledger or the every transaction is publicly available. You can go look at all the transactions. So being able to follow it all the way back, in theory, should not be difficult, but in practice is extremely difficult. And so I know that there are different groups and organizations working on trying to be able to trace back where that money ends up. But they mix up so much money with so many other things that it does become a little bit hard to find it. But that's one of the reasons why they do it. And it's also easy because they can be anywhere in the world. They can then go and purchase things with Bitcoin. They can turn Bitcoin into currency in different countries without any questions basically being asked. So there's a lot of that going on, and that's one of the reasons why criminals are doing this. Prior to this, they'd have to have you send a money order someplace, and preferably outside the United States, and preferably some country that, you know, isn't going to crack down on them, you know, ransoming, you know, someplace in the United States. So one of the reasons why I think that ransomware has really hit its stride recently is because the availability of cryptocurrencies as a cheap, effective payment method that is also almost untraceable for the attackers. So I think that only helps move that forward. So what are some of the other costs? So if you don't pay the ransom, and even if you do pay the ransom, there are going to be some additional costs that you're going to incur as an organization. You have to understand what those costs are and what they may end up costing you, because when you want to do a risk assessment to determine, okay, how much money should I put into the budget to protect against ransomware, you have to have an idea of how much it's going to cost, right? So look at all the types of costs, and we've talked to other organizations, local governments that have been hit with this, and things like downtime is definitely a huge cost. Lost revenue is not so much for local governments, although some of them have had delayed revenue. People paying taxes and stuff like that have been delayed. People paying for business permits or other types of payments being made to local governments may get delayed. Some organizations have had to waive late fees because the city or the local government was not able to take payments. Intangible cost, reputation, obviously. Your city like Atlanta or Baltimore ends up being front page news. And so there's definitely a reputation hit there. You're going to have, if you have insurance, you're going to have an insurance deductible. If you have insurance premiums, they may go up because you've had an incident. You're probably going to have legal fees involved with this. And that's before we get to recovery costs, things like forensics, the incident response, having other organizations come in and help you, the overtime for your staff to try and cover and do things manually, or just the IT staff trying to cover it, consulting costs of any consulting, and then the security controls that you didn't have in place that you now need to put into place to prevent being hit again in the future. So there's a lot of costs there. Our idea as an IT auditor, I want you to put the controls in first. You're going to spend the money, so spend it on the controls first. Make your organization less likely to be hit in the future to reduce your risk, and then reduce your overall costs, and then be able to continue your mission, your organization's mission. So now typical marks, when I say typical marks, is who is typically hit with this ransomware. And this goes back to 2016, and it really hasn't changed. They seem to still hit the same types of organizations or same types of devices. Local government has been at the top of the list all along. So even back in 2016, local government was on the top of the list. Medical hospitals and places like that, if you think about it, hospitals have a life safety issue, and if you lock out all of their devices that are heart monitors and everything else, they can't operate, and then that becomes a life safety issue, and you're more likely to pay. Now, the medical industry hit back as hard as they could security-wise initially on the onset, and I think they probably are being hit less than they were in the past because they got their they really, in the beginning times in 2016, late 2015, a lot of medical organizations, hospitals and such got hit, and they really had to come back with it. But we also see that non-traditional ways, they basically have a shotgun approach where they will hit any potential target. Anyone is a potential target for ransomware, and they'll hit individuals. They even hit a hotel key card access in Europe, so they locked out the hotel from the key card so people couldn't get in and out of their rooms. So the organization said, you know, we're not going to pay the ransom, and it's going to take us a while to recover, so we'll just issue hard keys instead of, you know, the normal keys that you have for rooms to all the guests. So all the guests could get back into the room because they had the traditional old keys. But then that hackers said, well, if you're not going to pay that, then we're going to lock out your registration system. And they hit their server that did the registration system and then asked for the ransom. So they got hit twice, and when they didn't want to pay, then they hit something else to put them into a little bit more pain. I don't know, that was the only thing that the article said. It didn't go into whether they paid for it or how they recovered from it, but I believe they are completely recovered now at this point, because it's been a few years from that one. So anyone's a potential target. Even little types of things like door locks you would never think would be hit, but they can be hit. Now, this just came out like a couple weeks ago saying that cities are being hit by ransomware attacks. You are the new target. If you're a local government, you are a target. School districts, and these hackers are hitting every city that they can. They hit like 20 plus cities in Texas. I think the latest count was 23, it might have been 22. Conflicting reports out there. Cities in Texas got hit, schools in Oklahoma and Georgia were hit, a number of them. So local government is definitely a big target right now, and that should make all local governments stand up and say, hey, whoa, we really need to know where we are right now. And that's why we developed a checklist so that they can take a look at it. And again, it's freely available. Now, a lot of cities have been hit with it. Atlanta was one of the highest ones that we talk about. And initially, when they did it, they thought it was going to cost them $2.6 million. But then later that year, they revised it that the cost of recovery was up to $17 million. Now, this is important information to know. If you know that recovery costs could cost millions of dollars, and if you're an organization the size of Atlanta, it's going to cost maybe around $17 million, then you can look back and say, okay, what in our budget can we spend money on to increase the security of our systems to reduce the likelihood of this happening? And basically, if you're spending less than $17 million in this situation, you're money ahead. Now, I'm not saying go out and spend $17 million on every security thing out there in the world. No, we got to be smart about taxpayer money and how we spend it. But we want to avoid spending the $17 million, right? Even if we have insurance that's going to cover it, it's going to be bad. Baltimore got hit with it. They are still in the process of recovering. Last I heard, there's still issues or still some services not available. And that happened earlier, late second quarter of this year, so just like a couple months ago. And they're estimating it to be at $18 million. And they're similar in size to Atlanta, so I mean, that size city, that's what they're probably looking at, somewhere between $17 and $18 million in cost. So it's worth taking a look at and saying, okay, what do we need to do for this? Now, let's look at what the ransom was versus the recovery cost. In Atlanta, the ransom that was asked for was $52,000. It ends up costing them $17 million. And I did put all the zeros in there on purpose because there's an order of magnitude here between what the cost of the ransom is and the cost of recovery. Again, the cost of the ransom for Baltimore was $76,000 was what they asked for, ends up costing them $18 million. Now, neither one of those cities paid the ransom. That's an important thing to do, and that's why they incurred the recovery costs the way they did, because every system had to go in to lock them out. So if you're one of these, if you're a local government and you are trying to figure out, okay, how much insurance do I need to make sure that I have? Well, you got some kind of idea here, right, on what it costs for an organization recovery. Other organizations have found that it is far less than $18 million because it really just kind of depends upon how sophisticated your systems are. We have a client that's a small city that was hit, and it's not going to cost, it may get to six figures. We're waiting to see. So we'll find out how that turns out for them. But, so what we have found is that the criminals have gone from just being indiscriminate, sending out emails and hoping somebody clicks so they can lock out a system, to being much more targeted in who they're attacking, and also trying to attack organizations that have a great value on their systems. They rely upon their systems to do normal everyday work. So they're trying to hit those organizations that are really reliant upon information systems. And they're they try to work to maximize the impact of their attack. So when they hit ransomware, they try to hit as much of your systems as possible so that you really feel the pain and you can't accomplish your mission, whatever that is, so that you're more likely to pay. So the more pain you have, the more likely you are to pay. So they try to hit the maximum impact to do it. And they hit many victims multiple times. And we'll talk about why that is here in just a moment, but they do hit multiple times. And if you think about it, if you're a cyber criminal and you run it like a business, you want repeat customers, right? So yeah, they want to hit you more than once. So let's talk about the bad guys, the cyber criminals. Let's look at things from their point of view. Most of these bad guys are looking for ways to make money. It's usually part of organized crime, and it's just another way to make money. And primarily what they're trying to do is they just want to get paid. And they look at, okay, how can we use cyber crime in order to get paid, as opposed to doing the other types of crimes that they have been involved in the past. And many of these organizations are also involved in other types of crime. So sometimes it's just cyber criminals doing it on their own. Some of them are also nation-state sponsored, and we'll talk about those separately because they're a different beast altogether. Their motives are different. The motives of most of the cyber criminals are to make money. And so if they're not going to make money, they're not going to do it. They're going to go on to something else, some other way of making money. Some people want to make a statement. You know, there may be cyber terrorists or cyber activists that want to make a statement, but most of them are not using ransomware to make that statement. It's not outside the realm of possibility that they might do that in the future, because many of these cyber criminals, they figured out a new way to make money, and that is to sell the tools to the malware to other people, other hackers, so that those other hackers can use and try to extort money out of it. So they'll make money by creating the software and then launching it against organizations, but then they'll also sell it to other hackers as well as another way to make money. Some people just want destruction. Most of the cyber criminals are not necessarily interested in that. They want to get paid, but some are into that. Mostly, I think that that's nation-state sponsored when it's the purpose of it is just destruction. Earlier this year, we did two in their threat actors. And if you go back to those sessions here in the Bright Talk channel, you'll see us talk about nation states. And some of the nation states, before they commit ground troops or anything like that in a battlefield, they may launch ransomware to take out news systems, banking systems, production systems, to kind of cripple the nation before they do any other type of an attack. And we've seen Russia do that a couple of times preemptively before they rolled tanks across the border. So we've seen them do that. That ransomware, if you go back to that session and watch it, its purpose was not to actually get a ransom. It was pretending to be ransomware, but its whole purpose was just to destroy systems. So why is ransomware appealing to cyber criminals? I mean, that's part of the question. It's like, why are they doing this? Why aren't they just breaking in and stealing data out of our systems like they've been doing for so many years? Well, there's different types of things that cyber criminals can do, and we'll talk about a couple of these here. One of the things is you might just be collateral damage. You may not have been the target. Your organization may not have been the target. They were targeting some other organization, and then you just got hit. Once things get out in the wild, like malware gets out in the wild and on the internet, you could get hit, and you had nothing to do with it. You weren't a target. You just were at the wrong place at the wrong time. I kind of think of it like the shotgun approach, right? You know, it just kind of sprays out there, and wherever it hits, it hits. So you could be collateral damage. Nation states may be focused more on destruction, in other words, breaking systems and taking them down. But what we have found is on the cybercrime side of things, it's either ransomware, data theft, or cryptojacking seems to be their main goals, because each one of those they can make money off of. Destruction, they don't really make any money off of it, so they kind of avoid that. But they also could try to do all of them on one target. So we have to kind of look at this. Now, let's look at a data breach. If you're a cyber criminal and you want to make money by data breach, the first thing you have to have is your victim has to have data that you can sell. So they have to have something that you can sell. If you don't have any information that they can sell in the black market, you're not going to be a target for a data breach. Now, you could still end up being a target for a data breach. There was a city in Florida that was hit, and the hackers took all the police footage out of the systems and then put it on the dark web. Now, they didn't do it to make any money. I don't know if they were doing it to make a statement or what, but the police camera footage, they ended up taking it and just putting it on the dark web. So not sure what their motive was in that. I'm sure if they had a motive, it might have been some type of activist or something like that did it, because they weren't asking for any money. So it was not likely cyber criminals behind it. Anyways, so they have to have something that they can sell of your system if they're going to break in and steal data. Then they have to break into your system. Then they have to move the system out without you noticing it. And there's a lot of different types of tools that you can get that can monitor your network traffic to kind of look for things, patterns of behavior on connections and stuff like that, to see if any information is being brought out. And then they have to go and sell the data to interested buyers. And one of the problems that they have with that is the black market is like any other market in the world, in that supply and demand really dictates the cost or the value of the data that you have. If a lot of people break in, steal a lot of data on a lot of different people, and you flood the black market with it, there's not going to be as many people buying that information on the black market. So you kind of have to gauge when you're going to sell it on the black market, just like you would stocks and stuff in the regular markets. The interesting thing with that is like the Equifax data breach, when they broke in and stole a bunch of information out of Equifax. They were able to, Equifax had data that they wanted, which is basically personally identifiable information, credit information on, a lot of people, millions of people. They must be able to break in the system. They were able to do that, and then they were able to move the data out of the system without being caught. And now they just need to have interested buyers. Now, the interesting thing is they haven't sold the information. So it's interesting, we're trying to figure out, well, who might have it? If it is a cyber criminal, are they sitting on it waiting for the prime time to sell the information? Are they going to sell it off in little bits here and there? Are they going to wait 5 years and then sell the information? Because a lot of the information that you have on your credit report is going to be still good in 5 years, like your Social Security number. So they could sell it 5 years from now when people aren't monitoring their credit, and maybe have a better impact or get more money per record in doing so. The other theory that's been posed out there is that nation states may have been behind it, and that nation states like China may have a large database of all the citizens of the United States, blackmail into being spies for them and stuff like that. And I don't know if there's any evidence to that. That's just one of the theories that's out there. Anyways, so that's if we have a data breach, right? And what about ransomware? In order for cyber criminals to make money on this situation, all they have to do is you have to have data or systems that you rely upon every day to do your business and accomplish your mission and objectives. So all they have to do is find somebody that does that, and that's everybody. You don't have computer systems that have no purpose that you don't use or whatever. More organizations rely upon these systems, phone systems, email systems. We rely upon that every day. So every organization then is potential. Local governments typically don't have a lot of data that people can sell on the black market, and so you're not going to be as big of a target for data breach. However, you are going to rely upon your systems, and so you're a perfect target for ransomware. So first thing you have to do is break in. So you have a system, all you have to do is break into it, and then all you have to do is lock your system out or make you think it's locked. There's been some instances where the ransomware wasn't actually encrypting files, it was just made to look like it did, and it didn't. So you want to make sure before you're trying to recover things that you know that for a fact that it is encrypted. And then they have to get you to pay so you can get your access back. So this is a lot less work for criminals. They don't have to take the information out. They don't have to try to resell it. All they have to do is lock your system out and lock it out in such a way that you're going to want to pay for it to get it back. Or your insurance company is going to want to pay for it because it's cheaper to do that than it is to try to recover. So that's what they're working on. They're trying to make it this way. Now this is interesting because this is very similar to the Somali pirates. You may have seen the movie. Remember the guy saying, "I'm the captain now"? Well, this is the same thing. You know, the funny thing about this is the only organizations that make money on this are the insurance companies. And what happens is freighters go through the area and then they're told, don't engage with the pirates. If the pirates come on, they ask for a ransom, we'll pay the ransom because the ransom is so small, we just pay it. And it's like you're paying a fee to get, through the area without getting attacked. So what insurance companies are doing is they just pay the ransom to get the ship back, and they get the ship, because the ships may have millions of dollars worth of cargo on there, and losing that, plus the ships are millions of dollars, is not a loss that they want to have. So if they just pay the ransom, and maybe it's only $50,000, maybe it's $100,000, it's still small change for that. The interesting thing is that RSA, one of the things, RSA conference is a cybersecurity conference. They said 2 years ago, the insurance companies, the amount of money that they collect on premiums, people paying for premiums, in that instance with the Somali pirates, is far more than they ever pay out in the ransoms or in the losses. You think about it from an insurance point of view, if you pay the ransom and it's $50,000, that's better than paying $18 million for someone to recover from something. So they just have to make sure that the insurance companies, the way they work, they have to make sure that they make enough money to cover any of the losses if they have to pay out on something like $18 million. So for them, to get it to a perfect storm where you're going to want to pay to get your information out, it's not very hard. You just make the ransom low, and you make it so that it's very enticing for them to just pay it and just be done with it. And so that's kind of the way the ransomware works. And it's the same model that Somali pirates use when they take ships. Now the new one that's also out there is even less work for the cyber criminals to make money, and it's called cryptojacking. It's not really the point of this conversation, but I do want to just point it out to you because you'll see here in just a minute why. In order for cyber criminals to make money on this system, all they have to do is get into any of your devices, any connected device, any device that's connected to the internet. All they have to do is break into it and hide on it. That's all they have to do. Then they can take that device and tell it to go mine for cryptocurrencies. One of the ways that you can make money for cryptocurrencies or create money in cryptocurrencies is by hashing algorithms that are used in the master ledger of the cryptocurrency that you're using. So it's even less work for them because all they have to do is set it up, and every time it generates a fraction of a Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency it is, it just transfers it to another wallet, and they just keep on doing that constantly. So it's an easy way for them to make money, and to hide in the system is not that difficult because a lot of organizations won't even notice that their system, oh, it's getting old, it's really slow, not realizing that maybe it's being used for cryptocurrencies mining. So here's why you need to know about the data breach and the cryptocurrencies, because what we've started to see is some people are using the ransomware in conjunction with the data breach and cryptojacking. Why make money one way when you can make it three ways, right? So think this through from a criminal's point of view. If they want to maximize their potential to make money, why don't you combine them together? And one of the ransomware variants that we have out there actually is a ransomware that is also a cryptocurrency generator. So it locks your system out, but then uses your system to try and mine for Bitcoins. So it's like a 1-2 punch. So they ransom your system, and while you're waiting to pay, they're just trying to crank out as much cryptocurrencies they possibly can on your system before you. That way, if you don't pay the ransom, then they got something, right? By the way, they don't make a lot of money with the cryptojacking. They really have to hit a lot of systems to make it worth their while. Otherwise, it's to make a lot of money. But think about this as well, and this has been a concern that security professionals have raised, is if they lock out your system and then you recover your system and you don't have access to the audit logs, you don't know if they actually exported any information out of your system. So if they actually get into your system, they lock your system out, and then they take that information out of your networks, and then they have the information that they have, and then if it's any information that they can sell in the black market, then they can also make money that way. So one of the concerns is, if you get hit with a ransom, do you know for a fact you did not also have a data breach? And most organizations that have been hit are going to be hard-pressed to say for certain that they haven't had a data breach as well. Because there's really kind of no way, if you lost all your audit logs, if they have the crypto keys for unlocking your data, they can take the data out as encrypted data and then decrypt it on their side, and then you would never know what it was because it was just encrypted information sent out somewhere onto the internet. So cyber criminals, they're oftentimes backed by criminal organizations, organized crimes, and money is most often their motive. Again, they're just trying to make money. If it is, or the nation state is behind it, and there's some ransomware that we believe was orchestrated by North Korea. So if it's a nation state sponsored, oftentimes destruction is the goal, not necessarily making money or destabilization of somebody else's economy to bolster their economy. So they may have different reasons for doing it, but usually it's focused around destruction or destabilization of another nation state. However, we've also noticed that they are willing to take money as well. They'll take money and lock your systems out, so they cause destabilization, and they also move money into their economy. And we believe that some of the money that was taken on some of the earlier ransomware stuff ended up back in North Korea. So now this makes it a little bit more scary, because if you do pay the ransom, are you funding terrorists? Are you funding other nation states that are actively hostile against the United States? If you knew that that's who you're paying, it would be definitely against the law. You would not be able to do that. You can't aid and abet our enemies knowingly. But if you do pay it, you may unknowingly be aiding and abetting other nation states that are working against our nation and other nations. So you kind of have to weigh all that as part of it as well. So they like to do everything that they can to increase the likelihood that you're going to pay. So they treat it as a business. They want repeat customers, so they're going to hit you more than once if they can. And they go so far as to have customer service to help you, to assist you to unlock your systems, to assist you in purchasing Bitcoins. They want to do everything they can do to help you, to encourage you to pay, just like any other business would too. They'll help you decrypt your systems. By doing that, they get a reputation, and that helps encourage other people to pay, right? Because if you got your systems back and somebody else says, hey, you know, we got hit by ransomware too, and your organization says, hey, we paid it and we got our information back, then that's going to encourage other people to pay too, which only fuels, you know, the crime, because crime is now paying. So they make reasonable demands and they're willing to negotiate. All of that is a part of good customer service if you think about it. How do we get people to pay? And that's what they're trying to do, is increase the likelihood that you're going to pay. So you have to be aware of that, because they're going to do anything they can do to do that. They treat it like any other customer. Like I said, they like repeat customers. Many victims are hit multiple times, and they start to combine revenue opportunities. In other words, do ransomware and cryptojacking at the same time, or also have a data breach related to it. So any way that they can kind of make some money, they're trying to work it out. It's just like any market-driven thing. It's a market, and there's a lot of risk in this one from their point of view. but not a lot of risk to them if they're not getting caught and they're just sending out stuff and they just hope somebody clicks on it or downloads something or picks up a USB stick and sticks it into one of the city's computers or something along those lines. So they're going to go where the money is, so they're going to focus on economies of scale. So they want to hit lots of targets, but they want to hit targets that have the ability to make a payment. They'd rather have one $50,000 payment than try to hit 50,000 people for, or 50 people with $1,000, right? It's a lot easier to hit one and do that. So when they take their money that they get from what the people that do pay, they actually spend the money on research and development to come up with new ways you know, same thing that you would do to better your product, but to better their ransomware to figure out how to get around, you know, antivirus and anti-malware softwares. And they even sell ransomware starter kits to anybody who wants to get in on the action. So they figured out, hey, we can make money by doing ransom, but we can also sell the code that we've developed and make money that way as well. So they're very opportunistic in the way that they look at making money for them. So let's look at one of their typical attacks. One of the things they want to do is get into your system, then they want to hide in your system because they need to scope out the place. They need to move around inside your organization, kind of figure out where everything is, where are the backups located, do they have any cloud services, do they synchronize with those, and then when we get ready to launch, when the cyber criminals get ready to launch an attack, they also want to say, hey, how do I stay inside the network, even if they eradicate me? And then they want to execute their attack. So look at it from their point of view. The easiest way for them to get in is social engineering. We've actually seen where phishing attempts have been sent to a local government where someone poses as the city manager and asks somebody in finance to give them some information like the W-2s or make a wire transfer or something like that. We've seen them in that email. The email's not coming from a city address. It was coming from like, they put into that email information that you would think would only be known by people within the organization. For example, one of them said, hey, congratulations on your promotion. Could you please send me the W-2s? Now, think about that. How did they know the person had a promotion? Well, there was an announcement made at a city council meeting. The city council meeting is then broadcast on the internet. Anybody in the world can see what the city council talked about. And in one of those meetings, one of the agenda items was to talk about a promotion. And that was the information that was included into an email that was crafted for a very particular person who had access to the HR information in order to send that information out. Just think about that. That is a targeted attack. They had to, just like any other criminal, they have to case the joint, right? They have to go around and look at your organization to kind of figure out what's the best email that I can craft that they're going to believe that it's actually coming from the city manager, even though it's not coming from a city email address. And that's how they did it. So think about that. You have to, so part of that, obviously, if you're thinking, you should say, hey, we need to train our users on this. Absolutely. Training is vitally important for us. So social engineering, they do phishing, they try to get browsers, unpatched systems. Remote access is a very popular one right now that they're trying to exploit. And a huge one is obsolete software and services. This is an issue, again, I deal mostly with local governments, and this is one that seems to plague them all. In other words, they have a system, maybe it's a Parks and Recs system or something like that, that's not considered high priority for the local government, and so they're running on old software, maybe they're running on an old server, unpatched, maybe there's new versions, but they're the one that they currently are using are obsolete because they haven't had a budget cycle that they can go in and justify upgrading that system to the newer version, whatever it is, because they're sometimes expensive. Well, here's the problem with that. A lot of these obsolete software and services are used as targets. In other words, once criminals get in, They try to find those systems that are old, unpatched, obsolete, so that they can go and try to hide in those systems for later reinfections. So they try to get into your network. Once they're in your network, they try to hide in your network, and they love all the obsolete software and services. Another thing they like to hit is what we call IoT, or Internet of Things. All those devices that you have in your network that are connected, cameras, doors, locking systems, all those other types of things, projectors, TVs, conference room phones, all of that kind of stuff, all those things are interconnected and on the network. Any one of those is a fair game target for them. And you think about it, most of those, almost all of those, have no anti-malware protections. They typically are not patched on a regular basis like servers are. So there's a big, huge, dark void in that. The fact, in 2018, the data breach report by Verizon said that 93% of data breaches are linked to some type of phishing or social engineering. 93%. That's huge. And I want to say it's like 95% of organizations that are hit have anti-malware software installed, the latest versions. So just having anti-malware is not enough to prevent this. In fact, one of the cities that we interviewed that was recently hit with ransomware, the version of the software they had was brand new, never seen before in the wild. So when they sent it to the antivirus vendors, they're like, we've never seen this before. We'll figure out a patch for you for it. We'd like to send this out to all the other antivirus vendors out there so that they can better prepare themselves for it too. So you're patient zero, basically, for that new variant of the software. Social engineering, it's good to understand kind of the different ways that people do this. And I know I always tell people that they should watch something like Catch Me If You Can, the story of Frank Abagnale. Back in the 60s, he was an excellent social engineer. He could walk into a hotel and get free rooms, get free dinners, all this kind of stuff. He just played the part, and he acted. Very good actor. You know, he'd dress up like an airplane pilot, show up, and just say, hey, you know, I've got a layover, and they told me to come over here. And of course, the hotels near the airports all have contracts with the airlines for people to spend the night, so they just write them up and just give them a room. These are the same type of things. Phishing is basically, think about phishing, like you throw bait out there and you just hope someone bites, right? And that's typically done via emails, but it can be done through chats. Text messages is another way that you do it, websites, that kind of thing. Phishing with a V is another form of that where it's just use voicemail. So they call somebody up, leave voicemail. There was that recent instance where was that? It was someone called in and pretended to be the CEO, talking in the CEO's voice as best as the person could do to convince somebody to do a wire transfer, and they fell for it. So they've even got that. So voice-based phishing attempts. They've had spear phishing. What's spear phishing? Spear phishing is when you go out there and you just throw the bait in there and you have a hook and you're just waiting for somebody to bite on it. Spear phishing is you target the fish that you're trying to catch, right? And so that's a good example, the one I gave you, where they targeted them by saying, hey, congratulations on your promotion. That was a targeted attack. They had to know something about the organization. That email would not work on anybody else that didn't get a promotion, right? And then another one we have is called whaling, and that's when they try to hit the big fish. So one of the ones that we've seen is they'll send email to like the CEO, CFO, and they'll pretend to be from the FBI, and they'll say, hey, your computer was engaged in a crime, and we don't think you were guilty, but we'd like to prove it, so, you know, call us back at this number, and then we'll send you a link, and we'll scan your computer to verify you weren't a part of the crime. Now, there's so many things wrong with that. People shouldn't fall for that, but people out of fear, one, the FBI is investigating them, so there's a little bit of fear there. But then also, oh, they're here to help. You know, they're going to prove that I'm innocent. Okay, so the FBI doesn't work that way. If they think there was a crime committed, they're going to have subpoenas, and they're going to come and they're going to seize whatever they have to do it. They're come with guns. They're not going to call you in advance and tell you, oh, we're going to come to prove you innocent. That's not the way they work. So You shouldn't fall for stuff like that, but a lot of CEOs are like, oh, I want to keep this out of the news. Let's just cooperate with them, and I have nothing to hide. But then it's just an opportunity for somebody to get in there and then install the malware onto your system right in front of your eyes as you're sitting there. Thing to remember is there's always going to be one employee who's going to click on anything. And so how do we prevent that? So we can do all the security awareness that we possibly can do, and we should do that. And if you don't have a program in place, contact us. We'll help you do that. But you need to have some type of security awareness put in place so that you're training your employees what to watch out for. But they're still going to possibly click on something, and so you need to have other things in place, what we call multiple layers of defense. So if one fails, something else will catch it, and that's a good security posture. Think about castles back in the old day. Where did they put they go down into the dungeon, down in the dark place. They put the gold down there, and then they put it, you know, behind a locked door inside of a building, and there's another locked door, and then there's a courtyard, and then there's an outer wall and an inner wall, and then there's a moat, and there's multiple layers of defense. Think about it. If you're an invading army, you have to get past the moat. You have to get past the outer wall. You have to get past the inner wall. You have to get past the door. You have to find out what door in the inside of the building has the treasure. You have to do all of that to get into it. And all along the way, there's going to be guards trying to fight and stop you. So the same type of thing is here. We want to have multiple layers of defense. So if one fails, hopefully the others will prevent the attack from happening. See, what hackers know is that they can get past your staff. They can get into your organization. So your staff is your first and last line of defense for your organization. So you don't want to leave them defenseless. You want them to be trained. You want them to know what to avoid and how to and who to report any incidents to. So this is vitally important for them. So here's the other thing. They like to hide into the network. Once they get inside the network, they don't want to get caught. So they got to hide in there. And the average time to detect somebody inside your organization for, this is just the average, industry average, is 180 days, 6 months. That gives them 6 months to go around your systems and find every nook and cranny, try and exploit every system they possibly can so that when you think you got rid of them, they're still there. So they gain access to your network and they try to remain undetected for an extended period of time. Now, if the average is 180 days, that means that there's people that are far more than 180 days. And those are just the ones that have been caught. Think of all the ones that we haven't found yet that are still in systems, you know, and they're well beyond the 180 days. They like to hide code in low priority systems. They like to hide it in IoT devices, printers, weird stuff, you know, phone systems. They typically encrypt their traffic and they use known protocols, so nobody, if you're looking at the network traffic, just looking at the network traffic is not enough. You're not going to know whether or not that's a malicious. You have to understand the nature of the traffic. Is it a camera system that you have on your network? Why is it connecting to a different connection that it's never connected to before? Even if it's using SSL, right? That should, you know, raise a red flag to say, hey, that's really interesting. That device has never done that before, and it has no reason to do that. So maybe that device is compromised. So you have to have that kind of insight into your systems, and most organizations don't have that level of insight. And that level of insight is usually fairly expensive. So it's one of the things you have to kind of, you know, risk versus cost, you know, you have to look at those things. Once they're inside your system, they want to move around. So we call that lateral movement within a network. They want to go, one, reconnaissance to try and figure out what other systems they can infect, try to get their malicious code into backups. So if you recover from backups, that you can get hit again. They try to find other systems to infect. And they do want to target backups, because if you have your backups available, then you just say, well, we're not going to pay the ransom, we'll just recover the backups. So they try to target those as well. And sometimes they know more because they've been in your network for 180 days or whatever. They oftentimes know more about your network than your own staff does, because your own staff are dealing with problems and day-to-day issues, and they don't have time to just sit and look on the network and see what's going on. where the criminals do. If they're in there for 180 days, the only thing they are doing is reconnaissance, trying to exploit other systems and lock other systems out. Once in, they try to evade detection, so I call it run silent, run deep, right? So they don't want you to find out that they're there, because then their system's not, their attack's not going to work. So they try to affect other systems that are not going to be a part of the attack, so that if you find and remove their code from the system that was attacked, they're still inside your network and they can still launch another attack. So they'll hide in other systems for future attacks. And then they'll try to preemptively, before they do an attack, hit the backups like we already mentioned. And they like to make, again, they like repeat customers. Don't be a two-time victim, right? They will hide code in other places on the network. Anything that's connected is a potential hiding spot for them. And that means that if you have been a victim of, every system has to be reviewed. And good luck trying to do it on things like camera systems, because you're going to have a hard time, one, finding out if there's any patching, or two, even being able to, how do you test it to see if it's been compromised, right? So some of these things are not going to be easy to do. And one of the reasons why it's difficult to do, and that's one of the reasons why people become multiple-time victims, is they got hit. Then they'll execute the attack. And they want to hit business-critical systems to bring the business or your organization to a halt. They want to maximize the impact of business operations. Again, all of this is done to encourage you to pay. And they want to bring everything to a halt. Baltimore is a good example where they came to a screeching halt. Their systems blocked out just about everything. And my understanding, they're still working on trying to get everything back to where it was. And that was only a few months ago. So recent hat, we went and recently interviewed a recent local government that was hit with it. They were hit with a new variant of Raikou, which is something that had not been seen in the wild yet. And they were hit 3 times. One of the reasons why they were hit by 3 times is the first system that got hit, they fixed, but the hackers had already broken into apparently the phone system and were laying in wait for the phone system. Once the other systems were recovered, then they launched. And then after that was fixed, they launched an attack against another. Or maybe the phone system was the last one. Not sure exactly the chronology there, but they hit multiple times, 3 different times, and it took them months to resolve. And one of the things that we found out from it, they needed outside support. So part of your preparing for being hit by ransomware is where are you going to get outside support from? If you're a local government, the good neighbor idea that other local governments will help you, you may want to formalize some of that before the incident happens. But generally, the local government that we know that got hit had outside assistance from other local governments, and they have now offered their assistance to other local governments who have been hit as well. One thing we also noticed that management had a vague notion of the threat. In other words, management kind of knew that there, but they hadn't really had a briefing on it. They didn't know what how likely their organization was to be hit. Management also had a vague notion, or a notion, that a lot of their systems were out of date, obsolete, and therefore at a higher level of vulnerability. But they didn't put the 2 to 2 together, right? So, yeah, management has this idea that there's a threat, and they have this idea that they have vulnerabilities, but they don't put 2 and 2 together to say, okay, because we have these vulnerabilities and because we don't have these controls in place and because we are a target, we really need to focus in on this right away. One of the things that we recommend is having a ransomware risk assessment done. You can do it yourself, or you can have an organization like we do them for our clients. We go out, we do a risk assessment, we go over the questionnaire that you can freely get yourself, but we also then come up with and make the connections for management so that management knows, okay, how likely is this threat? Are we in a good position or are we in a bad position? And most organizations want to know one way or the other. You know, if we're sitting good, then we want to know. If we're not, and we need a lot of work done, we need to know that too. You want to know actually what your situation is so that you can make the proper decisions. And management wants to be able to have good, viable information to make decisions on. Now, they had insurance, and they ended up having to pay for the deductible with that, and they had to have some additional funding from outside the organization to help with it, and they're still in the process. They haven't calculated the full cost of it yet, so there's things to look at for that. So we do have a checklist that we created that was based, we don't charge for it, it's a free checklist. You can get to our website, maesassociates.com, ransomware assessment. We send it out to all of our clients. There's a link for it is under attachments and links here in BrightTalk, and also on BrightTalk is a presentation under that same place. So what do you do next? So what we recommend is, at the very least, you can call us and we can help you, or download the questionnaire and answer it. At least you have an idea of what you don't have in place and what you should have in place. You should run some internal scans so that you have an idea of what your vulnerabilities are, and then you need to calculate the risk. There's different ways of calculating the risk. We have ways of doing it where we base it upon the type of control that you don't have in place and what's the likelihood that it can be exploited based upon known attacks. You can do a gap analysis with this, so everything that you answer no on the questionnaire, you know that that's the list of remediation items that you have. Then you can create a report that you can give to management, and then you should do a presentation with management after you've completed all of that. And the reason why you want to do a presentation with it is you want to make sure that management understands, so that when they're making decisions on anything from budget to whether or not you're going to go with a new system or prioritize getting rid of obsolete systems, they need to know what the risks are related to that so that they can make informed decisions. And we don't want to create panic unnecessarily. You don't want to be the guy saying the sky's falling, but we just sent all of the questionnaire out to all of our clients to say, here's a questionnaire for this. It's version 1.2. We had the first version that we sent out in I believe June, and then we updated and sent out to all our clients version 1.2 because there were some new things that came out. Client that received it, the very next day they got hit with ransomware, the second checklist. So the question is, why did they not prioritize the first time we sent the checklist? When we tell all of our clients, we don't contact our clients on an everyday basis, hey, by the way, you should watch out for this. We do when we know that there's a credible threat and when the threat or the risk is really high. And organizations, for whatever reason, don't put a priority on it. They got other things they got to do. I understand that. If you don't have the staff to do this, or the staff's not capable of doing this, then you need to get somebody from the outside so that you know what your risk is, and then you need to start remediating the list of items that you need to, or controls that you need to put in place to avoid being hit by ransomware. So what is that list? Well, we're going to go over that in the next session. So we're going to help you. We're going to go through, basically, we're going to go through the checklist. I'm not going to go through each individual question, but I'm going to explain each of what we're talking about in the questions, right? So that you understand kind of where we're coming from with the questions. And again, our whole point is we're trying to make the world cyber safe. We want you to not be a victim of ransomware. And if you have been a victim of ransomware, what do you need to do to make sure you're not a repeat client of these cyber criminals? So how can we do that? Again, download the questionnaire, go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and we're going to go over that tomorrow with our presentation tomorrow. So you may want to watch that one if you are going to go through the questionnaire, so you kind of understand where are we asking the questions we are, and where do we get the information from. So, and again, Mays & Associates, we have a lot of cybersecurity services. We do all kinds of assessments, including risk assessments, and we have a risk assessment that we do. We basically do all the homework for you and even make a presentation to management if desired or required, so that they can make informed decisions. And thank you for attending our talk today. We hope to see you tomorrow. Remember to subscribe to our channel so you can see upcoming stuff. Please rate our session. We really appreciate the feedback. And if you have any questions, please ask them now before we sign off. Other than that, you can always follow up with us on our blog, learnsecurity.org. There's a contact us there. You can fill out the form, send us in your questions, and we'll help you out any way we can. Should I ask Rob if you have anything to add, even though I've monopolized all the time?
I think you did a fantastic job.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yep.
So, well, I don't see any questions, so we'll see you next time.